All right, so let's take a look at part 2 of the study guide. So we're going to start with topic 3, which was solving quadratic equations, and we started by factoring. Now the nice thing is that any sort of question that I ask you on a test and it just says solve, you can use any method. You do not have to factor if you don't want to, but you're more than welcome to. All right, so you can use factoring, you can use quadratic formula, you can graph it. It does not matter which way you want to do it. Now, but if you do want to go through and factor it, you have to make sure it's in standard form first. Okay, so if we look at number 7, it's not in standard form because it's not set equal to 0. All right, so we need to make it equal to 0 by moving the 44 to the other side by doing the opposite. This is a positive 44, so I need to subtract it on both sides. So I'm going to subtract the 44 to get x squared minus 7x minus 44 is equal to 0. From there, we can actually go through and factor it, and this is a trinomial with the leading coefficient of 1. So we look for the two numbers that multiply to give us a negative 44 that add to give us a negative 7. Now, if they add to a negative, or if they multiply to a negative and they add to a negative, that tells us that one number has to be negative, the other has to be positive. So if we think of 44, it's even, so we can do 2 and 22. Those aren't 7 apart. And then we can do 11 and 4, and 11 and 4 are 7 apart. So we're going to use negative 11 and positive 4. So we can factor this into x minus 11 and x plus 4. And from there, we can set each one equal to 0 by splitting them up. So we get x minus 11 equals 0, and x plus 4 is equal to 0, and we get just the opposite. We get x is equal to positive 11, and x is equal to negative 4. Okay, but again, you don't have to go through and do factoring in order to do this. You can actually go through and do the quadratic formula, and that's what I'm going to go through next. Now, you can go through and factor all of these, but again, they have to be set equal to 0, just like number 11 is, just like 13. All these others have to be set equal to 0. Now, let's talk about quadratic formula. Now, quadratic formula will be given to you, and if you don't remember it, quadratic formula is x equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac, all divided by 2a. Okay, and again, that is in fact given to you. So let's take a look here at 17. Number 17, it is not set equal to 0. It is not in standard form, so we have to do that first. We have to make it x squared minus x minus 18 is equal to 0. And the reason why is because we need to know what our values of a, b, and c are, because a is in front of the x squared. So in our case here, a is 1. That looks like a 9, but that's an a. B is in front of the x, so b is negative 1, and c is the constant, so c is negative 18. And from there, we're just going to plug these three values into our formula. So we have x equals, the first one says negative b, which is the opposite of what I have here, so that gives me a positive 1. Then I have a plus and minus sign, a square root, and then inside I have b squared, so I'm going to do negative 1 squared, but I'm going to put it in parentheses, minus 4 times my value of a, which is 1, times my value of c, which is negative 18. And then I'm going to divide the entire thing by 2 times a, which is 1. Okay? Now I'm going to simplify this. I'm going to simplify it underneath here. Okay, I'll go over number 20 next. So I'm going to simplify this down here. So I have the positive 1, the plus and minus, the square root, negative 1 squared is positive 1. Negative 4 times 1 times negative 18 is positive 72. So we're going to do a positive 72. And I'm going to divide that all by 2. Okay? So from there, we just reduce inside. So we have 1 plus or minus the square root of 73, all divided by 2. And here's where you just want to use your calculator. So you can do both of these in there at the, individually. So we can do 1 plus the square root of 73. So if we do the square root of 73, we add 1, and then we divide that by 2. Our first answer, we get x is equal to 4.77 because we want to round to 2 decimals. That's when we add. And then the second one, if we subtract, so again, I'll do the square root of 73. And then I will take that away from 1 and divide that by 2. And that gives me a negative 3.77. Okay, so those are our two answers right there, a positive 4.77 and a negative 3.77. So let's do one more of these. We're going to look at number 20. Now number 20, again, none of these are in standard form, so we have to put this in standard form by moving the 81. So we get 4x squared minus 81 is equal to 0. We need our value of a, which is the 4. So a is 4. B is the value in front of the x, but there is no x. So that means b is 0. And then that means that c is that negative 81. Okay, so we can go through and use the quadratic formula. X equals negative b, which is still 0, plus and minus the square root. B squared is still 0 squared, minus 4 times a is 4, times c is negative 81, all divided by 2 times 4. Okay, put a line here. So I'm going to simplify. So I still have the 0 plus or minus the square root. 0 squared, that just cancels out. So we have negative 4 times negative 81, and that gives us 1,296. That's a 9. And we're dividing that by 8. Okay? Now we're going to take the square root of 1,296, and that gives us 36. So we have 0 plus and minus the square root of 36, all divided by 8, or not square root of 36, I'm sorry, just plus and minus 36. So we have two solutions. Solution 1 is 0 plus 36 over 8, and solution 2 is 0 minus 36 over 8. So if we do 36 divided by 8, we get 4.5, so this gives us positive 4.5, and this one gives us negative 4.5. So we have positive and negative. And again, one of your problems on your test, you will have to show doing this entire process, putting it in standard form, finding your values of a, b, and c, plugging into your formula, and simplifying correctly. Okay? All right, the last thing that we talked about is vertex form. Now, vertex form, this will not be given to you, but that is y equals a parentheses x minus h squared plus k, where the values of h and k are the vertex, and the value of A is either positive 1 or negative 1. Okay, so again, A is either 1 or negative 1 for our sake. 1 being if it goes up, and negative 1 if it goes down. So 24, we can see that our graph goes up. So right away, A is equal to 1. Our vertex, I can find here, that's at the point 4, negative 1. So that means that H is 4 and K is negative 1. So that gives me my equation of y equals 1 times x minus 4 squared plus, not plus, sorry, minus 1. Minus 1. Okay? Remember, your value inside with the x is always the opposite of what your value of h is. Because h was positive 4, I had to put a minus 4 inside. Okay? Same thing in number 25. My graph is going down, so a is negative 1. My vertex is at the point 4, 5. Okay, this is at 4, 5. So that means that h is again 4, and now k is at 5. So that gives me an equation of y equals negative 1 times x minus 4 squared plus 5. Okay? And that's it. That's what your test is over. Okay? So make sure you go through this study guide. Be ready to go. All right? And good luck.